What's up, everyone? Dragon back in with this of the Kaiju Cataclysm. Pardon the slightly sparse background. As I said in one of the previous episodes, we are in the process of moving. So things are, we've still the posters, but if you may notice some of the cases behind me are a little empty. This one I kind of wanted to just do a little bit of a retrospect. Or not really, but just kind of talk a little bit about something that I've been noticing. The dichotomy of, based on my chit-chat online, Twitter and Instagram, that is essentially kind of people who are essentially fans of Godzilla or King Kong, and I know for probably 90% of us, there's essentially an overlap. If you like one, you like the other, and vice versa, and there's not a lot of distinction between the two in terms of love them. You kind of lump them all into the same genre, but there are some people who come from specifically one background, fandom, whatever you want to call it, and another. And these are kind of the more traditionalists, the people who kind of adhere to Godzilla, for instance, specifically in the realm of a kaiju and what a kaiju represents. And other people kind of got into King Kong. And I'm not talking about like the Toho Kong. I'm talking about the people who are kind of like the original MC Cooper Kong, even the various remakes or different iterations of that story, the film in the 70s with Jeff Bridges, the Peter Jackson Kong, while not held in the same regard as the original film, obviously, but still tell a very different story of Kong than we see in the Toho films or even Skull Island, where he is very much a kaiju in that movie, meant to be this big, powerful, semi-indestructible monster, whereas kind of the original story of Kong was more or less meant to be a big animal. He was a big beast, and he was meant to represent, again, the fall of the American dream. He was much more a film icon in the sense of kind of old Hollywood and kind of the start of the golden age of filmmaking in the West and Hollywood, all that. So a very different thing. So I know a lot of hardcore King Kong purists actually don't really like the Toho Kong, how he was depicted in Godzilla, or King Kong versus Godzilla, or King Kong Escapes, kind of just chalking those up to more schlocky, or that's not really King Kong. And before some of you guys say, hey, no, technically that's Kong, understand that they're not entirely wrong. Now, I don't mind the Toho Kong, and from a personal preference, I actually prefer it, because at the end of the day, I'm a kaiju fan, so I'll always prefer the kaiju version of monsters than more, I guess, traditional. I mean, Kong is a huge ape, so I don't know how traditional that is. But what I mean by that is, the Kong that was depicted in '62 was a very different Kong than we had seen already. Again, if you're a fan of the original film, Kong was this, big animal, probably about 40, 50 feet tall, not indestructible, part of a lost world where he was ultimately brought to civilization, subdued, and killed. He was never meant to be this unstoppable force. Kong represented the old world clashing with the new, and basically whenever that happens, the new always wins out. The future always, defeats the past. The past always yields to the future. It's just the way of things. And that film was very symbolic. And people who are fans of that film are probably more in line to like movies like, The Lost World, those kinds of stories. It was much more of a Lost World adventure story. You could even go as far as to say that the only really difference between The Lost World and King Kong is the fact that instead of it being a world with just dinosaurs, there was this big ape at the epicenter. But even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, they bring a pterosaur back to civilization. In the film version, they bring back what at the time was called a brontosaurus. So Kong was much more in line with that kind of filmmaking. Because he was such a film icon, it had a big influence on Toho when the film was finally re-released in theaters, and so they wanted to kind of make their own, big creature movie, so to speak, and decided to kind of, in spirit of making it an analogy, decided to make it for the horrors of kind of the atom bomb, the nuclear tests that were happening, in the South Pacific, the hydrogen bomb, and basically just kind of the threat of the nuclear age, the dawning of this new age, of this new, incredibly destructive technology that was being developed. And in that sense, it's very much in the spirit of Kong, where you're using a monster or something large and powerful to kind of represent something else. But Godzilla was much more of a monster. Godzilla was a monster. Godzilla was born of nuclear fire. He was born of the horrors of, the atomic bomb and was a manifestation of the fear the Japanese had of having been bombed offensively by nuclear weapons, as well as just what it meant to live in this new age, and an age where something like nuclear weapons could exist, and what the future might hold because of that. So they represented two very different things, both analogies, but analogies for, again, very different things. So for Kong purists, Kong represents something very different, I think, to them than what for Godzilla purists, where Godzilla represents them. And again, I'll repeat myself. I'll probably repeat myself a lot in this video, so, bear with me. Most people like them both. Most people, it's fine. You like King Kong, then you automatically like Godzilla, and vice versa. Not a big deal. But there are still these kind of contingencies of people that are kind of solely in one camp and the other. And I've come to notice this a lot lately, because, if you follow my Instagram especially, I post a lot of just random Godzilla and or kaiju pictures. I post some other stuff too. But for the most part, it is Godzilla stuff. It's one of those things where, by the way, if you hear something in the background, it's the AC kicking on. I just realized I forgot to turn it off, so you might hear it right now in the background, so I apologize if you do. And if you don't hear it, then hey, don't worry about it. But the other thing is, I notice I every once in a while I'll post like a meme photo where it's just like a picture of Godzilla or something, and there'll be like a little caption. I posted one not too long ago where it was a scene from Destroy Monsters where Godzilla was kind of grappling with King Ghidorah, and he kind of had his head turned, and they just took it was a screenshot just at the right moment where Godzilla looked like he was doing, like that face. And the caption basically read, I'm paraphrasing, that face you make when somebody says, King Kong could beat Godzilla. So it's kind of like the fuck did you say kind of look. And I probably have never gotten more comments on that photo than I have for any other picture I ever posted. And it was everything from, what you'd expect from Godzilla fans, or like, fuck that, of course Godzilla can win, to then like people saying no, Kong beat him before, and I'm not going to get into the whole back and forth of who won that fight. My personal feelings are, listen, you can say whatever you want, but until I see someone get beaten, someone who can't breathe in the water swimming away from the epicenter of a fight, to me doesn't count as a victory. But at the end of the day, I really don't care. That's neither here nor there. But that was never the point of it. I just thought it was funny. I got a kick out of it because it's just Godzilla giving me like a bitch please look, and I just thought it was funny. I'll post it on Instagram. But it ignited, I don't want to say a firestorm because it wasn't, but it ignited this conversation. I'll say conversation to be nice. And I noticed that there was a lot of, Team Kong people. I had one person even say, Kong will and should win the fight. And then that's what actually got me, because I know there's some people who say, yeah, Kong will win, but for a lot of people, they say Kong will win for kind of political reasons, meaning, okay, they don't know if they'll have the rights to Godzilla for very long, so let's say they want the MonsterVerse to continue, well, maybe they'll have to have Kong lead the MonsterVerse because they have the rights to him. Kong is American, and the legendary, it's a film whose primary market is in the West, even though ironically now Legendary is owned by a Chinese company, so not necessarily, but because these are made by Westerners, essentially the Western monster has to win, and that's usually the reasons why, and that'll be the reasons why Godzilla fans will say Kong will win, not because they want him to, but because they just kind of feel the politics will just get in the way, and that'll be the way it goes. But then there were some people who were saying, no, Kong should win, and I was like, well, okay, first of all, should. I mean, these are fictitious characters. There is no should, really. No, they're not real. Sorry to break it to you. But my friend said, well, it's Godzilla's franchise, technically. Kong was ushered in, but we wouldn't have a Skull Island or a Godzilla vs. Kong if Legendary hadn't gone to Toho and, acquired the licensing rights to make Godzilla films. Godzilla is the backbone of this whole thing. So this is Godzilla's franchise that Kong has been included into, so Kong should win. But that's, again, getting into like the business side of it. But my first thought was like, no, Kong shouldn't win. Godzilla should win. Godzilla's cooler. At the end of the day, Kong is a big ape who got an honorary degree from the University of Kaiju, He was only a true kaiju before Skull Island in '62. King Kong escapes. He was much smaller even and behaved much in the same way Kong did in the Western films. So really, prior to that film, the 2016 film, or no, it was 2017, excuse me, I believe it. 2016 or no, 2017, sorry. That was the only film, so it was kind of more of an honorary position, and it was a film where, okay, they gave Kong all these extra abilities, they made him bigger, they nerfed Godzilla in that film, okay. But so Shiro was like, well, no, Godzilla at the end of the day is the kaiju. He is the main kaiju in terms, he is the backbone of the kaiju genre. He was, the original 54 Gojira is considered by many to be the first true kaiju film. Yes, I know there were films before, like The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and obviously Kong. And while these films were, impressive in their own right, in terms of a kaiju film, I feel, and I know a lot of other people I've spoken to, feel like there were more stepping stones to the kaiju genre, where culminating in Godzilla. But that's if you're a kaiju fan. You look at, again, Kong and Beast as stepping stones. I mean, they're enjoyable movies in their own right, but when I think of the original King Kong film, my first thought is that's step one to Godzilla. And then when I think of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, I think that's step two. And then I think of them as their own individual movies. But because Godzilla is my center, my end-all be-all, my first thought is like, yep, that film was very important to Godzilla in this way, and then this film was very important to Godzilla in this way. And without these two films, we wouldn't have gotten to the film, Gojira. But that's coming as a Godzilla fan. Now, if you're not a Godzilla fan, you're not looking at it that way. You might see the original 54, Godzilla film as a, as a true classic, absolutely, a historical film in its own right. But then you're also going to look at Kong as not just some stepping stone. You're going to see Kong as a pivotal movie on its own. And it is. I'm not disputing that fact, understand, but it takes me like that split second to get my brain in that mode where I'm like, but Kong is a film that, reshaped Hollywood and Western filmmaking, But the very first thing that pops into my head when I think of King Kong is the film that led to Godzilla. And that is because I am first and foremost a Godzilla fan. That is where my heart lies. But there are a lot of people that's not the case. So for them, they just see Godzilla as just a big monster movie. And while they acknowledge that the original, King Kong film was not a kaiju film, and it was never intended to be that, if you are going to turn Kong into a kaiju, well, Kong is the original. Kong is the icon. Kong was that. It's King Kong. He should be the winner, because Godzilla at the end of the day is, he's just a big lizard, right? Cool, sure, but who cares? It's King Kong. And those are the people who aren't necessarily Godzilla fans or kaiju fans. They come from the King Kong side. And even though Kong now in the Monsterverse is officially a kaiju, they're not watching it because it's a kaiju film. They're watching it because it's a Kong film. That's where their heart lies first and foremost. It's kaiju second. It's Godzilla related second or third. It's a Kong movie first. Whereas when I see Skull Island, I think, okay, this is a kaiju film in the Godzilla universe, the Monsterverse. And that's kind of what I wanted to, kind of what I've been noticing from all this is that, well, again, the most of us we're seeing just there's a crossover. It's like, sure, put Godzilla and King Kong together. That's like saying Frankenstein's monster and Dracula are in the same universe. Yeah, sure, makes sense. Why not? But for a lot of people, they represent two different things. And I think the big difference where it lies, if you're a Godzilla fan first and foremost, if you're kind of a Godzilla traditionist or even a purist, and dare I say, a fanboy even, your love of Godzilla is different than I think someone who is just in love with Kong and not the kaiju genre as a whole other monster, but like they like King Kong. And I would say, much in the same way that like people who look to superheroes, people who grew up loving superheroes, people who grew up, wanting to be Iron Man or Captain America or Spider-Man or Wolverine even, versus people like myself who grew up wanting to be Godzilla or Gorgo or Gamera, you look to superheroes because you want to see a version of yourself that is better. You want to see your humanity with the volume turned up. You want to be better than you are, but you still want to be what you are. Now, granted, I would say King Kong is removed a step or two from that because Kong is not human. and is much less humanoid than, again, your average superhero. Yes, I know there's non-humanoid superheroes, but I'm thinking of like, the major Superman or Supergirl, Batman, characters like that, The Flash, Green Lantern, characters like that. You can see yourself in them. You could see yourself putting the Green Lantern, core ring on and becoming a Green Lantern. You can see yourself, putting on the cape and cowl and being Batman. You can see, yourself, I don't know, being Superman, being able to fly around, having heat vision, and all that. You can see yourself doing that. Most people don't see themselves as a giant monster that can level a city. Again, that's the thing those guys fight against. That's the thing those guys, defend us from. Those things are the villains. In Kong, well, yes, he's a monster. He's big. He's still more like us. You can see physically more of a person as we would define it in Kong than you could Godzilla or Mothra or Rodan or King Ghidorah or Baragon, or Manda or Varan. Those are much more removed in terms of kind of the visual cues that we look to in terms of what we idealize ourselves at. And yet, in spite of that, there are those of us who do exactly that, that we look to that which is not like us as our source of inspiration, or the stuff that we look up to, no pun intended there. And that is, I think, because Godzilla purists, or people who are just lovers of monsters, is that they see the frailty of humanity, and they see humanity as something that is perhaps not enough. It's not good enough. Being human or human-like isn't enough for me. It doesn't cut it. I need to be something more. Enter a monster. Godzilla is not a man. Godzilla is not an extension of a man. Godzilla is a monster. It is something completely removed from humanity. And therefore, that's what's attractive about it, is that you don't see the humanity in it. You see something that you deem as better than humanity. Because for you, humanity is not the end-all be-all. Being the best man or woman you can be is limiting. You can be the best man or woman you can be, but you'll still kind of reach that wall, that ceiling. You want to break through it and become something more than human. That's the monster fan. That's the lover of monsters. That's the Godzilla fan. The Godzilla purist, the one who's just Godzilla. Kong, I think, leans more into the other. I think Kong leans more into the person who wants to be the best version of themselves, to be the best man, the best woman. Again, Kong would be the more extreme end of that because he's still removed enough from humanity. But you can still see the humanity in him. And because of that, people look at Kong and they see something more relatable. They see themselves in Kong. They feel a level of empathy for Kong because he is. You look into his eyes and you see something significantly more human than when you do so for Godzilla. And for them, that is the attraction to Kong. That is the draw to Kong rather than Godzilla, because Kong looks and feels more like them, whereas Godzilla feels more removed from them. But they look to themselves for hope, for legitimacy, for connection. And so they're going to want something that feels more human, that feels more like an extension of their humanity, rather than something that abandons humanity altogether. And therein lies kind of the difference. One group feels that humanity is just too limiting and uninspired. So you want to be, again, more than human. You want to be something monstrous, Godzilla. Other people feel that the human heart is the end-all be-all, that to be human is to be divine in and of itself, and that the struggle that is the human condition is beautiful in and of itself. So to see Kong, somebody that is so human-like, struggling, fighting for his life, feels like an extension of the human condition, and therefore they look to Kong. So when someone says Kong should win, you have to understand, before you get really offended by it as a Godzilla fan, because when I first read that, I was like, nope, everything you just said is completely incorrect. And I, as a Godzilla fan, I'll always stand by that. But at the same time, I have to remove myself and understand that where their frame of mind is at. And it's basically like someone telling me, like if they're making a bunch of King Kong movies, and they said, we're going to put Godzilla in one of them. My first thought would be like, okay, great, Godzilla better win. Even if they apply the same logic, saying, well, it's Kong's franchise, Godzilla's just coming into it, I would still be like, no, Godzilla should win because Godzilla is the true monster. Godzilla is a proper monster. What Godzilla is beyond what Kong is, because Kong's level of monstrosity, for lack of a better phrasing, had a limit that Godzilla went past. But that's again coming from that side, that playing for that team. Depending on who you are, depending on what's important to you, depending on what you define as purposeful and meaningful, yeah, you might look at Kong, but yeah, Kong should win, because at the end of the day, we're human beings. And Kong is an extension of human being. Kong is more relatable to human beings, and therefore it is more important, narratively speaking, that Kong be victorious. Whereas the people on the other side who see humanity as perhaps something not so great or not so special, or just quite frankly a little basic, you're like, no, that just feels too limiting. If the extension of what is good, great is basically how human it is, then the world just feels very plain and dull and boring. But to see something like Godzilla, his mere existence, cinematically speaking, is this thing to marvel at, because he is not human. He is beyond humanity. He is proof that life can be greater and grander than humanity. And that's coming from that side of it. It is wanting something that we feel that, as Godzilla fans, that there is more to humanity, or that there's more than humanity. That humanity, in and of itself, is a limiting thing. And for us to truly marvel at something, for us to truly aspire to be something, we must go beyond humanity. Whereas the other team kind of feels the opposite, that no, we need to lean into our humanity. So we need a monster that is more human than monster, even perhaps. It's an interesting dichotomy, because for the longest time, it's not really a conversation people have. But now that these two are being pitted against each other for the first time in, it's almost like 40, 50 something years. I apologize, I'm terrible with numbers in my head, but the original film came out in 1962, so whatever the year that is, that's the number. So now this kind of older conversation is coming to light again. It's kind of bringing everyone out of the woodworks. And again, for the most of us, we're just like, hey, it's a big monster movie, awesome. But for some people, they're drawing that line and saying, they're saying, nope, I am team this. I stand by this, and I don't care. If you're Team Godzilla, you're like, if you're a Kong fan, you're saying Kong came first. Kong is the original icon. We wouldn't have Godzilla without Kong, or at least a very different iteration of Godzilla. Maybe not even Godzilla at all. Maybe their story of nuclear terror would be not about a monster and more, metaphorical in that sense. It might actually be about nuclear weapons, but because of Kong, they made him a monster, and that kind of thing. And then Kong really is the granddaddy of all this. And because of that, it's about Kong. Kong should win. Whereas again, the other team is just like, Kong is a footnote in the history that is Godzilla. Kong was, a necessary prototype that led to the original Ishiro Honda classic Gojira, which was the epitome of what Kong and the Beast Between 8,000 Fathoms was trying to achieve. That would be that argument. Which one's right? Well, neither one of them is right or wrong. It's just kind of, your what's the word, rhetoric, depending on which team you have. It's almost like a political candidate. You support your candidate, you're on their team, and you're going to basically make a point for them. And a lot of times the points the other team is making are the same points, they're just putting a different spin on it. The one's putting a positive on it, the other's putting a negative on it, and vice versa. And that's really it. And again, I'm not above doing that myself, because while I recognize Kong as a film icon, the cinephile in me can be very objective and understand the importance of King Kong, but the Godzilla fan in me, again, sees like, okay, that's all well and good, but at the end of the day, Gojira, you know what I mean? So, and again, Kong fans are the same way. They recognize the original Ishiro Honda classic was a classic, that it was a very important film in terms of, Japan dealing with, the nuclear attacks and everything, and in the metaphor that is Godzilla. They understand that, and they respect that, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's all about King Kong. So, it really comes down to what the kinds of people who who are standing behind both characters, and the people who are very much about one and not about the other. And that is because they kind of come from two different mindsets, two different ways of thinking. And when you understand where it is that the other is coming from, you understand why it is they think and feel and say what they do. And you can't really blame them. You may not agree with them, granted, but you understand where they're coming from. They're not doing it just to troll you, or they're not doing it just, to be an asshole. You understand that from their perspective, what they're saying makes sense. And as a Godzilla fan, I understand that from a strictly Kong fan's perspective. Someone who's only interested in King Kong, not Toho Kong, not how Kong fits in with Godzilla, not the Kong that had lightning powers and all that kind of stuff. No. The people who understand just the Beauty and the Beast story of Kong, basically, the classic story of Kong. Kong as a tragic monster, not as a kaiju. You understand where they're coming from, and I do, and I get why they say what they do, and it's why I don't like debating them. I don't agree with their opinion, but I respect their opinion. I respect the right for them to have it, because had I come up in a different way and fall in love with Kong the way they did, I'd be saying the same thing. Just as if they kind of grew up the way that I did and been exposed to Godzilla the way they did, they'd be saying what I'm saying. So it's really just a matter of circumstance. We are all just a product of the circumstances that led to our being fans of one or the other, or both. So to be a Kong fan, to be a Godzilla fan, I think for most people nowadays, it's one and the same. I mean, you might have your preference, but generally speaking, if you like Godzilla movies, you probably like Kong movies, and vice versa. But there are some who are like, I don't consider King Kong a kaiju. Kong being put up with Godzilla, I think it's more gimmicky. Ultimately, I think Kong is, Kong, and a lot of people say, yeah, I felt it was more just a gimmick. But Kong with Godzilla, ultimately Godzilla has his own, rose gallery of other monsters. Kong doesn't need to be a part of it. Again, that's just speaking about in terms of the two extreme sides. But it's interesting to see where those two sides come from and why they feel the way they do. They don't just see each monster as basically the same. They just like him better for one aesthetic or the other. Well, I like Kong because he's a mammal, so Kong. And I like Godzilla because he's a big dinosaurian thing. Okay. No, a lot of it is what we look for in a character like that, what we look for in a monster. Some people want a monster that is more like them, more relatable, Frankenstein's monster. Some people want a monster that is more removed from that, the Gill Man. So it kind of comes down to preference. So Kong should win. Well, shouldn't win. Godzilla should win. Okay, well, he should win. It's not about should, it's about whatever the studio's going to decide to do, because they're made up and they're writing the script. But it ultimately depends what the films want to put, the 2020 film Godzilla vs. Kong wants to put their stock in, so to speak. What message is the message you're trying to tell? That at the end of the day, we need to look to our humanity for our salvation, that it is our humanity that will ultimately prove to be that which delivers us, and therefore the monster that best exemplifies that will be, the monster that should be victorious. Or is man meant to be small and insignificant, and that we need to understand that as human beings, that this is not our world, that we are only a piece of the fabric that makes it up, and that we have our place in this world, and that ultimately the fate of the world is not ours to decide, that we live in the shadow of titans, monsters, kaiju, and that it is they who will ultimately decide the fate of the world. The monsters, that which are beyond us, both in terms of behavior and just aesthetic. It depends on which side the studio is taking. I mean, more than likely we'll probably get a little bit of both, realistically speaking. But in terms of who is victorious, just outright, it's probably going to come down to what's a little bit more important. Which side of the coin are they kind of leaning on more? And we'll have to wait and see. I mean, perhaps the first, the film will give a much more clear stance on that, but the film might also be a little bit more ambiguous about it. It might ultimately leave it up to us to decide what's more important. But in terms of who's really going to beat who, I mean, that's going to come down to what viewpoint is more important, or not more important, but what viewpoint is the film trying to tell? What version, half side of this story is the film putting out there? That's going to determine that. But yeah, no, that's really kind of it. That's kind of all I really wanted to talk about. It's something I've just been noticing lately, and it's spoken about more with the onset of this new film. But it's interesting now that it's coming up again, and I think it is very telling about society and how we view monsters and what is it about a monster that is important to us, or what facts are more important than the others. And again, it really just comes from two different schools of thought. So, people who are just Godzilla fans and people who are just Kong fans, I think that really it's just two kind of backgrounds, two mindsets, two ways of thinking. So depending on kind of what you look for, yeah, you might be Team Kong. And it might be, while you might respect Godzilla and think Godzilla is cool, ultimately you think it is important that Kong be victorious. And if you're from the other school of thought, you're like, well, yeah, but it's more important. Kong is cool, he's neat, but it's more about Godzilla. It is more important culturally and cinematically that Godzilla be the apex, the supreme monster. And it's really just going to come down to the filmmakers, the writers, the studio, what they want to say. Obviously, if you guys follow the channel, you know what I want. To me, at the end of the day, sure, if you want to make Kong give Godzilla a good fight, that's fine. Get your money's worth, no problem. But to me, Godzilla should be the victor, plain and simple. And if you're wondering why I think that, all the reasons why I stated earlier before, those are my reasons. That's why I think Godzilla should be the winner. For all the reasons why I said for, the Godzilla side of things. But if you're on the other side, I understand why you think the opposite. So there's no need to argue, there's no need to debate, because ultimately you're not going to convince me. There's no universe where you will convince me that Godzilla should win. Even if Godzilla is presented as the harbinger of doom, and that he is victorious, he will wipe out all life on this planet, reducing the planet Earth to just a barren wasteland, I will still root for Godzilla. Call me a zealot, whatever, but that's where I'm going. So there's no point in debating me. There is no point. You will never convince me. You will never convince me. But at the same time, I'm not going to do the same to you. Because I don't think I'm going to convince you. I don't think there's anything I'm going to say that's going to make you think that, you know what, yeah, forget Kong. I'm all about Godzilla. I don't think I'm going to say anything to you that's going to make you do that. So I'm not going to do it either. So ultimately, these characters aren't real. It's all fiction, people. There are real problems in the world right now worth getting, upset over and huffing and puffing and going on Twitter and Instagram and typing things out. And this is my opinion about this. Okay, that's fine. This doesn't really matter. It's not real. So there's no point in arguing, debating, but just know that I understand where you're coming from, and I respect where you come from, because I understand that you're not just saying it to be different. There is a very specific and meaningful reason why you have the opinion you do, that you have the viewpoint that you do, and it is the same for myself and those like myself, is that it comes from just that background, our background, and what feels right to us, what feels more naturalistic to us, what feels like just like an extension of just our psyche. And that's what monsters ultimately are. They're extensions of who we are. They represent the best and the worst of us, and depending on who we are and how we view ourselves and our surroundings and our world, those are the monsters that speak to us, that ultimately speak for us. So depending on who you are, where you come from, Kong is a representation of you. Just like Godzilla is a representation of kind of what's important to me, what I hold dear. And that's the beauty of monsters. They are the most important things in the world to us in a grand fashion. And that's why I love kaiju, because again, that's what kaiju are. But anyway, yep, that's going to do it for this one. I just kind of wanted to come on here and talk about that just because I thought it was something very interesting. And it was something I've been finding myself thinking more and more about as I see more and more of this kind of dialogue happening. Again, it seems like now whenever I post like a meme online, it opens up, I can post 100 Godzilla pictures in a day, just images, nobody says anything. The second there's like some text with it, suddenly everyone, is weighing in one way or the other. And so I thought it was fascinating that, there are such, polarizing views on this issue, and I kind of wanted to just look into a little bit more of as to why that was, because I find it interesting and fascinating. And again, like I said, I realize though, at the end of the day, for the vast majority of people, hey, it's all good to them. Godzilla, Kong, whatever. Lump it all together. Hey, more monsters are always a good thing. And again, that's fine. But I just kind of wanted to talk about the two kind of, I guess maybe fringe groups, as it were, But anyway, that's going to do it for this one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace!